So it's 2018 and these two dudes from Chile decided to do a stop motion movie. This stop motion movie, many would think it's like a fairy tale because there's a little girl, there's a forest, there's wolves, there's pigs, kind of like your typical fairy tale. The thing is, this movie was propaganda. The animators wanted to make this movie a propaganda for a cult. And this cult existed in Chile for 40 years until it got raided and was taken down. But before that, that cult was real. And in this cult, they would not only abuse kids, they, for some reason, torture politicians and also created chemical weapons under bunkers. How did this colony, how did this cult ever even get to this point? So these two animators, they make the animation, but I wouldn't say it's a fairy tale because there's no good ending in this fairy tale. Animators purposely made this a propaganda. They have this message in it where it's like basically, hey kids, if you try to leave, the world's only gonna hurt you. So don't dare to leave. Come back to us. That's essentially what the animation is trying to tell you. The name of the film is called La Casa Lobo, The Wolf House, and it has a 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. This even got the attention of the dude behind Hereditary and Midsummer, Ari Aster. He even reached out to the two animators if they wanted to work on his later projects. So it's 1961 and Paul Schäfer and his 300 followers are leaving Germany. Paul Schäfer was your typical evangelical preacher. He was well spoken. He had a fatherly demeanor where people would call him Uncle Paul, Tío Paul, and he had a glass eye. Schäfer wasn't in Chile because he loved Chile. He was on the run. He was leaving Germany. Back in Germany, he had been accused of abusing boys at a group all boys home since the 50s. So instead of going to prison, he just grabbed his followers and moved all the way to Chile. And in Chile, he basically ended up buying a whole 300,000 acres of land in the middle of nowhere. This is where he ends up calling it Colonia Dignidad. In other words, Dignity Colony. From the outside world, many would probably think it was a good community. They had blonde kids dressed up in German traditional clothing, dancing. They had a choir, they had a hospital. They even offered free healthcare to their people. Schäfer, in order to make it seem like everything was all good and wholesome, he recorded it and would show it to a lot of politicians and diplomats just to say, hey, we're doing good over here. It's pretty nice. But little did they know that it was the opposite. It was not nice. The colony was basically evil. They did not let men and women be together. They did not let them get married unless they were forced to get married. And if by any chance a kid was born, they would take the kid away and make someone else raise it. So definitely this isn't a spot that I would want to be at. No fun, no games. They would only work 16 hours with no pay. Also, there was no radio, no newspaper, no talking, no nothing. It was horrible. Especially if you got out of line. And if you got out of the line, you'll basically get beat, you'll get drugged, electroshocked, no anesthesia, no nothing. You'll just get beat. And just because Schäfer left Germany, that did not change anything. He was still up to no good. He was still abusing kids. And not only the German kids from their colony, there was also Chilean kids attending their school because it was free. And I wonder why. But to think that that's not even the worst part. In 1973, something happened that ended up changing the whole colony's actions. They started doing more different things. So in September 1973, that's when General Augusto Pinochet becomes dictator of Chile. And that's where they go searching for locations to, make people go disappear. And Colonia Dignidad, they put their hands up. They were ready to give up their spot for the government. So this place ends up becoming a spot where they would interrogate and torture political enemies or anything like that. So they ended up basically partnering with Pinochet's secret police called DINA, and they started building underground bunkers where they started to develop chemical weapons, gas, rocket launchers. So it's said that at least over 300 political prisoners were kept here, and most of them died and got buried on the location. So when Pinochet needed the evidence gone, what they would do is they'll basically dig up the bodies, burn them with phosphorus, and then throw the ashes to the river. People actually tried to get this out in 1966. This man named Wolfgang Muller, he went to the authorities, but that was no help at all. The German embassy was on Schäfer's side. They're recovering for him, and the Chilean officials just didn't care. It really wasn't until the 90s when Chile becomes a democracy, and in 97, a lot of families start coming out against child abuse, so they go raid the compound. Schäfer ends up leaving and going and hiding for another 8 years, and it's not until 2005 when they find him and he's convicted in 25 counts of child abuse, torture, and manslaughter. He ends up staying in prison till 2010, where he dies in the prison hospital at the age of 88. The weird thing is, Colony, the place where Schäfer and all those crimes happened at, where they abused kids, tortured politicians, it's actually still there. They just rebranded it to a tourist resort. You could literally go over there and eat sausage, like for real. I'm not even kidding. You could stay there, you could rent a room, go for it. I want you guys to tell me how it is. So now, let's talk about the animators. So the animators are Cristóbal, León, and Joaquín Cociña. Both of them born in 1980 in Santiago, who eventually end up growing up to become animators. Colonia Dignidad was basically something that they knew existed in Santiago. It was just something that they knew already was there, and the past and the affiliation with the German Paul Schäfer. So yeah, they knew about the history of Colonia Dignidad, and that's when they come with this question and inspiration, like, what if Paul Schäfer made an animation today, and how would it be? Like, what would the message be? That was basically what inspired them to create Casa Lobos, the Wolf House. They really wanted to get into this to create a fake propaganda for the how can I say, for the cult that once existed, because now this is later in the future, and they wanted to make something as if Schäfer himself wanted to make something that he would actually show his kids of his community, so that if they ever decided to leave, they wouldn't leave. They try to make this a little scary, honestly. They want to make them believe that the world is full of wolves and that they're safe with their Theo Paw. So normally when people do stop motion, they usually do it like in a studio or in a room away from everybody, just them and their project. Well, no, not these two animators. These guys would do it in front of everybody in the museum. They would legit create huge paper mache figures, paint them directly on the walls. They would build stuff, destroy it, build stuff, destroy it in front of everybody. And that's kind of what made the whole process of making this film unique, because it wasn't ever, I don't think there's ever been something kind of done like that. When I was watching it, I noticed that it was switched from physical to painting to completely destroying whatever they created and then starting over again. So normally when someone makes a stop motion movie, they do it in a studio, right? Closed doors, nobody sees the process, you just see the finished product. These guys did the complete opposite. They set up workshops inside public art galleries, like actual museums, and they animated the entire movie in front of whoever walked in. So imagine this, you just casually walk into a random museum and you see these two dudes drastically just building paper mache, painting and destroying it all at the same time, taking pictures and just doing it all over and over and over again for 5 years straight. It's insane. I don't know if I would be able to just do the same thing over and over, destroy it over and over, build it, destroy it, create it. It's insane. It's manic. The animation style that came out of this is generally unlike anything I've ever seen. Characters start out as 3D sculptures and then they just melt into the wall and become flat paintings. Furniture turns into faces, walls drip and peel off, nothing stays solid. The whole movie feels like one long continuous shot gliding through a fever dream, where everything is constantly falling apart and rebuilding itself. As someone animates and draws, I would be so frustrated to make something and then destroy it again and just to do it all over again. Apparently these guys were doing it in life-size like environments, like their scenes were life-size, and you could actually tell when you watch the movie. There's just so much detail in every frame, so I'm not surprised that everything was life-size. These guys were for sure definitely rebuilding sets over and over. You could tell it in the film. It's just a lot happening. So the movie starts with this live action intro in German. There's a narrator with this really warm, almost bedtime story voice, talking about how wonderful and peaceful life is at the colony, and then he introduces the animated story as like a little moral lesson for kids. The animation kicks in. There's a girl named Maria. She lives in the colony. She messes up. She lets 3 pigs escape. They punish her with 100 days of solitary confinement. She can't handle it. She runs, gets out into the forest. But here's the thing, she was never free. This whole time there's a voice in the back calling her, telling her to come back home, and it's a German voice, which I noticed. The German voice calling her back, it's just there in the back. It's just there in the back, and it's gentle and sweet, telling Maria to come back home. The wolf is Paul Schäfer. That's what these animators intended to do. They wanted to make Paul Schäfer the wolf. It's as if he's a fatherly figure calling Maria home, back to his compound. Maria finds this abandoned house in the woods. There are 2 pigs inside. She's so lonely that she somehow transforms them into these blonde, blue-eyed children, Pedro and Anna. She tries to play house. She teaches them German songs. She teaches them religion. She's trying to build this normal, civilized little life. But the house starts falling apart. The food runs out. The walls start melting. It gets dark. Pedro and Anna get hungry and violent, and they start turning back into pigs. This is when Maria starts to break. And at the very end, Maria is terrified. She's hungry. She's calling back to the wolf because she just wants to get taken back. She wants to go back home to the colony. And of course the wolf says, yes, welcome home. That's how it ends. The propaganda worked. Freedom was the nightmare. The cult was the only safe place. Come back to Uncle Paul. And the reason it hits so hard is because you realize that that's not just a fairy tale. That is the exact psychological mechanism that kept 300 real human beings trapped for 40 years. That's how cults actually work. They don't lock you in, they convince you that leaving is worse than staying. So La Casa Lobo premiered in the Berlin Film Festival in 2018. They won the Calgary Film Prize, went to Annecy, which is the biggest animation film festival on the planet. They have a 100% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 92 on Metacritic. But here's the part that actually blew my mind. Ari Aster, the man behind Hereditary and Midsummer, he looks at their work and is like, these are my guys, these are the guys. So he ends up getting them to work. He gets them to work on another project after this called A Bow is Afraid. They end up doing some stop motion for a dream scene in that movie. So what happens is these 2 Chilean animators who basically spent 5 years of their life working on the animation in museums finally get to work with Ari Aster, one of the biggest directors on the planet. 2 underground Chilean animators who spent 5 years making a movie about a real cult inside public museums ended up working with one of the biggest directors on the planet. That doesn't happen unless the art is real, unless it's actually came from something. I think what makes the Wolf House scary isn't because of the animation. I think it's more because it actually is real. The cult existed, and the fact that the animators made this a propaganda directed towards kids so that they wouldn't leave the community, or the colony I mean, is very scary because Paul Schäfer is an evil man, and all this evilness prompted the animators to create this film. Yeah, so the Wolf House is scary, not because of its visuals, but because it's based off a real life cult, and these kids that were stuck in that colony were most definitely told not to leave, to stay with their Uncle Paul, their Tío Paul, that weirdo, that weird ass dude. I think the craziest part about the Colonia Dignidad is that they just end up rebranding and turn into a bed and breakfast. That's insane. So you could go, I could go, we could go visit this place where a lot of crimes took place, people dying, and God knows what else. So some nightmares don't end, they just rebrand. I'm Boxhead, and if you made it this far, hit the subscribe.